A black sedan crawls up a tire track road through pine country at 11 o'clock at night. 3 men in the back, 1 in the front. None of them belong to this mountain. Half a mile ahead in the clearing, a porch light comes on. A girl stands in the doorway of a rusted Quonset hut, 19 years old. Brown wool coat too big for her shoulders. On her right hand, a thin gold ring that belonged to a woman who died on Interstate 25 10 years ago in what the state called a single vehicle accident. The state was wrong. Behind her in the dark of the building, 4 men step into the porch light. An old soldier, a carpenter, a pastor, a retired state trooper with a badge he is not technically entitled to wear tonight. From the tree line, 3 more shapes come out of the dark. The sedan stops. A door opens. The wind moved differently up in those mountains. Silas Whitfield had lived 67 years, and he had learned to listen for it. It came down off the high peaks in the late afternoon, slow and patient, the way a man walks towards something he has decided to do. It came through the broken seam in the roof of the half-built Quonset hut, and it bent the flame of the kerosene lamp on the workbench. And Silas watched it, and he did not move. April 1999, Pine Hollow, Colorado. The old man sat at a wooden bench he had built with his own hands 40 years before. His shoulders were stooped now under a brown wool coat, and his hair, what was left of it, had gone the color of bone. On the bench in front of him lay an open leather journal, the cover dark with age, the pages still mostly empty. A bottle of black ink stood uncapped beside a heavy fountain pen. The pen had been his father's. The hand that held it was a builder's hand, callous thick at the base of the thumb, the nail of the right index finger black where a hammer had caught it, sometime back in February. He did not remember which day. The days had stopped meaning much. In the breast pocket of his coat, folded into quarters, was an obituary cut from the Denver Post. Marlene Whitfield, beloved daughter of Silas Whitfield of Pine Hollow, mother of 1. Died March 4th in a single vehicle accident on Interstate 25. The paper had folded itself into the shape of his chest now. He had carried it for 31 days. He had not cried again since the funeral. He did not believe he would. There was no room left in him for that kind of weeping. There was only the work. He picked up the pen. He dipped it. He wrote across the top of the first clean page, in a hand that had not shaken in 50 years, Delaney. If you are reading this, I am gone, and you are 19 years old, just as I have figured it. He stopped. He looked at the words. He looked through the cracked window glass of the door he had not yet hung straight out into the cold spring rain that was beginning to come down sideways through the pines. Somewhere far off, an owl was calling. He had been hearing that same owl or one just like it since he was a boy. He set the pen down. He spoke to the empty building, and his voice was low and steady and very tired. By the time you read this, I will have it ready for you. All of it. And I will have it ready for them, too. The lamp guttered. The wind shifted. The old man closed the journal slowly, the way a priest closes a Bible after a hard sermon. And he sat in the dim metal cavern of the thing he was building. And he waited for the cold to make him move. Pine Hollow, Colorado. 10 years later, the county juvenile housing center sat on the cracked edge of Jefferson County, a flat brick building the color of old coffee. Delaney Whitfield walked out through the side door on the morning of her 19th birthday, with everything she owned in a canvas pack on her shoulder. The sky above the parking lot was that thin gray of mountain spring, the kind that promised rain and never delivered it. Patches of dirty snow still clung to the curbs. She stopped on the bottom step. Behind her, the heavy metal door eased shut on its hydraulic, and the click of the latch was almost gentle, but it was the loudest sound she had heard in 5 years. 5 years inside. 5 years of bunks lined up against painted cinder block of count, at lights out of being someone else's problem on a clipboard. She did not look back at the building. She had promised herself she would not look back. She kept that promise. In the pack on her shoulder were 3 shirts. A paperback copy of East of Eden that had belonged to her mother. A toothbrush in a Ziploc bag and a hand-me-down winter coat she had refused to wear yet because it still smelled like the girl who had owned it before her. In the right front pocket of her jeans were 2 20s and a 3. $43. Everything she had. In her left hand was a manila envelope. The social worker had handed it to her at 6 that morning on her way out. The woman had looked tired the way social workers always look tired, and she had said only this was forwarded down from the probate office in Pine Hollow. It belonged to your grandfather. He left instructions that you were to receive it on your 19th birthday and not before. Delaney had not opened it inside the building. She had wanted to be on her own ground, whatever that meant, before she opened it. Now she stood under the gray Colorado sky, and she peeled back the flap. Inside was a letter on the stationery of a law office she had never heard of, and a map drawn by hand on heavy paper, the kind people used to use for drafting. The map was simple. A road, a turn, a mark. At the bottom of the letter in neat black type was a single line that didn't make sense. To claim title to the property, the heir need only pay $10 in back taxes. She read it again. She read it a third time. $10. Not 10,000. Not even 100. 10. She stood there in the parking lot for a long time. The wind pulled at the corner of the page. Somewhere across the lot, a car door slammed and an engine started. None of it touched her. $10 was almost a quarter of everything she owned. But $10 was also a bus ticket. $10 was a decision. And she had not been allowed to make a real decision in 5 years. She thought about her grandfather. She had not let herself think about him in a long time, because thinking about him had always brought her mother back too close, and her mother was a wound she had learned to walk around. But she thought about him now. She remembered the smell of sawdust in his flannel shirts. She remembered the bone-handled pocket knife he wore on his belt, always even at the kitchen table. She remembered the slow, patient way he explained things, the way he would say, "No, look at it again. Look at how it was put together." A man who said that to a child was not the kind of man who made jokes about money. If Silas Whitfield had written down $10, then $10 was the number. Delaney folded the letter back into the envelope. She slid it into the inside pocket of the canvas pack against the spine of the paperback novel. She turned away from the brick building she would never see again, and she walked. The Greyhound out of Denver left at 10:40 that morning. She gave the man at the counter a $10 bill, and he gave her a thin paper ticket and a look she had seen before. The look people gave a girl her age, with a pack on her shoulder, and nowhere obvious to be. She did not return the look. She found a seat near the back against the window, and she put her forehead against the glass, and she waited for the bus to move. 4 hours into the mountains, the city fell away first, then the suburbs, then the long, flat stretches of brown grass where the highway ran south and west, and then the road began to climb. The pines came in slow, then they came in thick. The bus shuddered around the curves of a 2-lane highway, and the towns got smaller and farther apart, and the gas stations leaned a little more, and the signs faded a little more, and Delaney watched all of it go by through a streak on the glass, and she felt something old and quiet begin to open in her chest. She let herself think about her mother. She had been 9 years old. The night had been a Wednesday in mid-February, raining hard. Her mother had been wearing the green corduroy jacket she always wore when she was upset, the one with the wooden buttons. She had not spoken in the car. She had driven Delaney up into the foothills and pulled into the gravel drive of a small wooden house Delaney had been to only a handful of times, and she had said, "Stay in the car, sweetheart. I have to talk to your grandpa for a minute." 20 minutes. Delaney had counted on the digital clock in the dashboard. When her mother had come back out, her eyes had been red, and her hands had been shaking on the steering wheel, and she had said, "Only we're going home, Dell. We're going home. We'll figure it out. I love you, baby, do you hear me?" 2 weeks later, on the night of March 4th, Marlene Whitfield's car had gone off the side of Interstate 25 in a place where there was no rain and no traffic and no reason for a car to go off the road. The police had called it a single vehicle accident. They had said, "tired driver." They had said, "wet pavement," though it had not been wet. They had said these things, and they had closed the file, and a Jefferson County social worker had come and put Delaney in a car of her own. Delaney had asked once when she was 12 whether anyone had ever really looked into it. The woman she asked had not answered. After that, Delaney had stopped asking. The Greyhound climbed. She must have slept some, because when she opened her eyes again, the bus was coming down the long, gentle grade into Pine Hollow, and the late afternoon light was the color of old brass, and the pines on either side of the road stood so close together. They looked like one tall, dark wall. The town was smaller than she had pictured it. One main street running maybe 4 blocks. A diner with a neon sign in the window that read, "Eat," in pink letters, half of them flickering. A hardware store with hand-painted lettering on the glass, Granger Hardware and Tool. A barber pole that did not turn. A red brick building set back from the street, with a wooden shingle hanging over the door. Pembroke and Associates, attorneys at law. She stepped down off the bus with the pack on her shoulder. The driver did not say goodbye. The bus pulled away in a low diesel cough and left her standing on the curb in front of a town she had never been to in her life. And she walked toward the brick building because that was what the letter had said to do. The hallway inside Pembroke and Associates smelled of old paper and pipe tobacco. The carpet was the color of dried moss. A brass plate on the second door read, "Harrison Pembroke." She knocked once. A voice on the other side said, "Come in." Harrison Pembroke was a tall man, very thin in the shoulders, with white hair combed straight back and small round glasses that he wore low on his nose. He was perhaps 75 years old. He stood when she came in slowly, the way men stand when their knees have stopped being friendly. He looked at her for a long moment without saying anything. Then he said in a voice gone soft with what might have been recognition, You look more like your mother than you know." She did not answer. She had been told that twice that day already, and she had not been in town 20 minutes. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. He sat. He opened a thick folder that was already on the blotter in front of him, as though he had been expecting her, which he had been. He had been expecting her for 10 years. "This is the title to the property," he said. He slid a single sheet of cream-colored paper across the desk toward her. "This is the deed. Your grandfather placed it in trust, 1999. The trust has held it ever since. There is also this." From a drawer he produced an iron key, 4 inches long, black, with age heavier than it looked. He set it on the desk between them like a man setting down a chess piece he had thought a long time about. "And there is this," a second envelope, smaller, sealed in black wax. He did not slide it across. He held it. He looked at her over the tops of his glasses. "This one was given to me by your grandfather with very specific instructions. I am to give it to you with the deed, but you are not to open it now. You are to open it only when you feel on your own that something has begun to go wrong on that piece of land. He said you would know when." He paused. Outside, somewhere down the street, a dog began to bark, and then thought better of it. "Miss Whitfield," he said, "your grandfather was the most careful man I ever practiced law for. He prepared this for you when you were 9 years old. Whatever is in that second envelope, you should not open it until you need it." He was a man who knew what he was doing. She reached for the envelopes and the iron key and the deed. She held them. They were heavier than they had any right to be. "How much?" she said. Her voice was the first sound she had made in this office. $10, he said. He almost smiled. The state of Colorado is a stubborn old thing. The taxes have to be paid. She took her wallet from her back pocket. She unfolded a $10 bill, the same kind that had once bought her a bus ticket, and she laid it flat on the desk. Pembroke looked at the bill for a moment, as though it embarrassed him, and then he took it and tucked it into a receipt book and gave her a small carbon copy, which she folded into her shirt pocket because she had nowhere else to put it. He walked her to the door. At the door, he stopped and put a hand on her shoulder for just a second, gently, the way a man touches something he is afraid of breaking. He waited a long time, he said. "You take care of yourself out there, Miss Whitfield." Then he closed the door, and she was back in the hall, and she went out into the gray afternoon with the deed and the iron key and the sealed envelope and the address of a piece of land that until that moment she had not really believed was hers. The directions on the map were simple in the way a thing is simple only on paper. Follow County Road 14 3 miles east out of town. Turn at the second cattle gate. Walk the rest. She walked it. It took her 2 hours. The county road went into the trees and got narrow, and stopped pretending to be a road, and the cattle gate she was looking for had not been opened in so long that the hinges were grown over with a kind of yellow lichen, and beyond the gate was a pair of pale tire tracks that the spring grass had nearly reclaimed. She walked between those tracks for what felt like a long time. The pines rose up tall on either side of her, and the wind moved through them slow and steady, and the world got quieter the deeper she went. At one point, she stopped. She did not know why she stopped at first. Then she looked down at the ground and she saw it, in the soft thaw of the spring mud, just at the edge of the right-hand tire track. was the print of a man's boot. Size 11, maybe 12. Deep at the heel the way a print is deep when the man stood there for a while and looked at something. The print was fresh. It had not been there long enough for the wind to soften the edges. Whoever had made it had walked this same road in this same direction within the last few hours. She stood very still and listened to the trees. Nothing moved that should not be moving. A crow called twice and then went silent. She did not run. She did not turn back. She kept walking, but she walked differently after that. She walked the way a woman walks who is not sure she is alone. The clearing opened ahead of her at the bottom of a long, shallow draw between two rises of pine. And then she saw it. The building sat in the middle of the clearing like a great rusted whale that had crawled up out of the earth and died there. A Quonset hut, the kind the Army used to ship surplus all over the West after the wars, half a cylinder of corrugated steel, maybe 60 feet long and 20 feet high at the peak. The outer skin had gone the color of old blood, orange and brown in long vertical streaks, where the rain had run down it for 40 winters. Weeds had grown up against the curved walls. A pair of broken-out windows near the front looked back at her like two flat, dark eyes. She walked toward it slowly. Her boots made small sucking sounds in the mud. The doors at the front were two big slabs of riveted steel, chained together with a length of rusted chain and held shut by a padlock the size of her fist. The padlock was the same dull black as the iron key. She took the key out of her pocket. Her hand was steady. She had not expected that. She had expected her hand to shake. She slid the key into the lock. For a second, nothing happened. The metal resisted. She thought, oh, of course, after everything. Of course it wouldn't open. Of course the old man would have made one last joke. Then she put her weight into it, and she turned the key, and the lock gave with a hard, low clunk that she felt in the bones of her wrist. The chain dropped from the handle and hit the steel door with a sound like a small bell falling down a long flight of stairs. She pulled. The door groaned open on hinges that had not moved in a decade. Cold air came out at her. Cold air and the smell of dust and old engine oil and something else underneath it. Something sweeter and woodier like the inside of a cedar chest that has been closed a long time. She stepped inside. It was bigger than she had thought. The curved metal ceiling rose high above her into shadow. The floor was concrete poured rough but level, and her boot heels echoed back to her from the far end of the building. Light came in from one place, only a long, thin crack in the ribbed steel of the roof high up, and that light fell straight down through the dust in a single pale shaft, like a spotlight on a stage. And at the center of that shaft of light, dead center on the concrete floor, sat a wooden crate with rope handles. She walked toward it the way a person walks toward a door they have dreamed about. The crate was not large, maybe 2 feet square. The wood was darkened by age, but it was not rotted. The corners were dovetailed. She crouched down beside it and ran her fingers along the joinery, and she knew without being told who had built it. There was no lid. The straw on top had been packed down flat by time. She brushed it aside. The first thing she saw was glass. Mason jars. 12 of them, maybe 13, packed in tight, each one wrapped in a piece of old burlap. She lifted one out. It was heavier than a jar should have been. She held it up into the shaft of light. Inside the jar, tied in a tight bundle with a rubber band gone brittle, was a stack of $20 bills. The bills were old. The kind with the smaller portraits, the kind a man would have set aside in the 80s or the early 90s. 50 bills to the bundle. She knew that somehow before she counted them. $1,000. She set the jar down very carefully on the concrete. She lifted out a second jar, then a third, then a fourth. Every jar, every single jar. She sat down on the cold concrete floor in the shaft of dust-filled light, and she put her hands flat on her thighs, and she stared at the open crate, and she did not laugh, and she did not cry. She made a small, low sound in the back of her throat. That was neither one. It was the sound of a thing inside her that had been holding its breath for 19 years, finally letting it out. Then she leaned forward. Under the jars, under the straw lining at the bottom, something else was waiting. It was a leather journal. The cover was dark, almost black with handling. Across the front, embossed in gold that had long since worn down to a memory of gold, was a name. Silas Whitfield. She lifted it. It was heavy. She turned it over in her hands. Then she opened it. On the first page, in ink that had faded only slightly, was a letter written to her in a hand she had not seen in 10 years, and that she nonetheless recognized at once, the way a person recognizes the voice of someone they used to love. Delaney. If you are reading this, I am gone, and you are 19 years old, just as I have figured it. The money is not the point. The money is a tool. You will need it to build whatever it is you are going to build out here, and you should use it. But it is not the gift. Do you understand me, sweetheart? It is not the gift. But there is something I have to warn you about, and you have to read this part carefully. If a man comes here named Bradford Whitfield, do not believe one word that comes out of his mouth. He is the son of a man I once called my brother. His name was Earl. Earl is the only person on this earth I never forgave, and I will not forgive him in whatever comes next either. Bradford has been waiting for me to die. He may already know you are coming. He may already be on his way. When you are ready to hear the rest of it, go into town and find a man named Hollis Granger at the hardware store. He fought beside me at Heartbreak Ridge in 1952. He has been waiting for you for 10 years. He will tell you what I could not put in a letter. I love you, Dell. I always did. I am sorry I had to do it this way. Your grandpa, Silas. She read it twice. Then she read it a third time, slower, the way her grandfather had taught her to read a thing when the thing mattered. She closed the journal. She sat there a long while in the shaft of light, with the open crate in front of her, and the 12 jars of money beside it, and the names Bradford and Earl and Hollis ringing slowly in her head, and the air in the great rusted building cold and very still around her. Then she did something she had not planned to do. She opened the journal again and she flipped past the first page, and she let the pages riffle through her fingers slowly, until somewhere around the middle they stopped on their own, the way old books will stop on the page. You held them open to longest. There tucked into the seam was a thin envelope she had not seen before. She slid it out. The envelope was unsealed. She opened it. Inside were 5 $100 bills, crisp, the kind that had been kept flat between pages for a very long time. On top of the bills was a folded slip of paper. She unfolded it. In her grandfather's handwriting, 4 words. For an emergency Dell. Below the words was a telephone number with a 303 area code. Denver. She stared at the number. She did not know whose it was. The handwriting beside it was steady but tight, the way a man writes when he is trying very hard to keep something in. She tucked the bills and the slip of paper into the inside pocket of her jacket, against her ribs where she could feel them. Then she stood up. She had work to do before nightfall. She closed the crate. She covered it with the canvas tarp she had found earlier in the corner. She walked the length of the building, slowly looking up at the curved ribs of the roof, at the crack of light, at the cast-iron wood stove, half buried under rusted scrap in the back corner. She walked the perimeter from the inside. She counted the broken windows. She noted the door that did not hang straight, the one she would have to fix first. She made herself think about the work. Just the work. By the time the light outside began to fail, she had dragged the wood stove out into the open and brushed 2 decades of dust off of it. She had scavenged a length of stovepipe from the rafters. She had found in a steel toolbox under the bench a hammer and a flat-blade screwdriver and a hand axe whose edge was still bright. The old man had left her more than money. He had left her the start of a kit. She made a small fire in the stove with kindling she split from a length of scrap 2x4. She watched the flame catch and curl up into the dark pipe, and after a while she felt the iron begin to warm at her shins, and she sat down on the concrete next to it, with her back against the warm metal flank of the stove, and she put her hands flat on the floor on either side of her, and she let her head tip back against the iron. Outside, the wind was coming up. She closed her eyes. She did not know how long she had been like that when she heard it. A footfall. On gravel. Outside the building. She opened her eyes. She did not move otherwise. The sound came again. Then again. Slow, deliberate, the way a man walks when he is not in a hurry and does not want to be heard. The footsteps went around the side of the Quonset hut. They paused once near the broken window. They continued. They went all the way around to the back. They paused again longer near the rear wall, where the metal had rotted thin at the base. Then they came back. Then they faded away down the tire track road the way she had come in, and after a long minute even the sound of the boots in the mud was gone. She sat very still. She listened. She listened for a long time. Then slowly she reached out across the concrete floor with her left hand, and she closed her fingers around the wooden handle of the hand axe. She did not get up. She did not call out. She just sat there with her back against the warm iron of her grandfather's stove, and the hand axe in her grip. And outside the wind kept coming, and somewhere far up the ridge an owl called twice in the dark. And she thought in a voice she did not recognize as entirely her own. "You knew, didn't you, old man? You knew they would come." The wood stove ticked beside her in the cooling air. The shaft of light through the roof was gone now. Only the orange flicker through the seam of the stove door lit the great curved cavern of metal where she sat. Delaney Whitfield kept her eyes on the door she had just unlocked, and she did not sleep. Dawn came up gray over the ridge. Delaney had not slept. She had sat with her back against the stove until the iron went cold against her spine, and then she had sat anyway, and somewhere around 4 in the morning the axe had gotten heavy in her hand, and she had laid it across her knees. And when the first thin light came through the broken windows, she stood up slowly the way an old woman stands, and she set the axe on the workbench and she walked to the door. She was a careful girl, Delaney Whitfield. 5 years in the system had taught her to be careful. She did not throw the door open. She stood beside it where the hinges were, and she pushed it slowly with 2 fingers, and she looked out through the widening crack. The clearing was empty. The pines stood quiet. A thin mist hung low in the grass. There was no truck, no man, no sound but the distant wet drip of snowmelt off the eaves of the building. She looked down at her boots. On the threshold of the door, flat against the steel, was a piece of paper, folded into quarters. She picked it up. She unfolded it slowly. The handwriting was a man's, blunt and unhurried, written in a black ballpoint that had pressed hard enough to dent the paper. Go back to the city, little girl, before it is too late. There was no name. There was no signature. There was nothing else on the paper. She stood there a long minute holding it. Then she did something that surprised her. She did not crumple it. She did not throw it. She folded it back along its creases neatly, the way her grandfather had taught her to fold a tax receipt. And she walked back inside the building, and she opened the leather journal to the back, and she pressed the note flat between 2 empty pages, and she closed the book on it. She would keep that note. She had a feeling she was going to need it. She took $300 from one of the jars. She counted it twice. She rolled it inside a clean sock and pushed the sock to the bottom of her jacket pocket. She closed the crate again. She covered it with the canvas. She walked out into the clearing, locked the door behind her with the iron key, and started down the tire track road toward town. She walked the 2 miles back to County Road 14 slower than she had walked them coming in. She watched the mud for boot prints. She did not see any new ones, but she also did not see the old ones she had seen the day before. The thaw was at work. The earth was forgetting. She got to Granger Hardware and Tool just after the open sign was turned in the window. A small bell rang over the door. The shop inside smelled the way her grandfather's shirts had smelled. Sawdust and oil and the faintly metallic sweetness of new nails in an open keg. The shelves were dark wood, stacked floor to ceiling, the kind of shelves built by a man who meant to use them his whole life. The floor was honey-colored from 100 years of foot traffic. Behind the counter, a thin old man in a green canvas apron sat on a wooden stool with a Denver Post folded into quarters on his knee. He was reading the obituary page through reading glasses that sat low on his nose. He looked up when she came in. He looked at her for what felt like a very long time. The paper slid out of his hands and landed on the counter without him noticing it. Then he stood up. Hollis Granger was 76 years old. He was tall in the way old men used to be tall before age folded them down. His hair was the color of new steel wool and cut close to the scalp. He had a small white scar that ran from the corner of his left eye to his cheekbone, a scar so old that the skin around it had grown over it like water settling around a stone. He stared at her with eyes that were watering at the corners, and he said nothing for several seconds. And then he said in a voice that came up out of him from a long way down, "You are Marlene's daughter." She did not answer. She nodded once. He walked around the end of the counter. He did not approach her. He walked past her to the front of the shop, and he turned the open sign back around to closed, and he locked the door, and he pulled the shade down. Then he turned to face her, in the dim and the quiet of the little hardware store, and he said, "Come in the back. Coffee's been on since 6." The back room of Granger Hardware was smaller than the front and warmer. A pot-bellied stove, 2 wooden chairs that did not match, a blue enamel coffee pot on top of the stove, and 2 thick white mugs hanging from hooks on the wall. There was a window that looked out on an alley and a sliver of pine. He poured the coffee. He gave her a mug. He sat down in the chair that was clearly his chair, the one with the right armrest worn down to bare wood. She sat in the other. He looked at her for another long moment. "Your grandpa," he said. "He told me about 10 years ago that one day a girl was gonna walk in here who looked like Marlene Whitfield. And he said I was not to make her say a single word until she had finished her coffee. She felt something behind her eyes try to do something she would not let it do. She drank the coffee instead. It was strong enough to walk on. He waited until she had set the cup down. Then he said, 'All right, now ask me.' She took a breath. 'Who was Earl?' she said. He nodded once slow like a man who had been told the right question and was relieved. Then he told her. Silas and Earl Whitfield had been brothers born 19 months apart on a hardscrabble farm outside Pueblo, Colorado in the early 1930s. They had a younger sister, Beatrice. Their father had been a hard man who beat his wife and his children, and their mother had been a soft woman who never lived to see 50. Silas had gone to Korea in 1950, 18 years old, a private in the 2nd Infantry Division. He had come home in 1953 with a Bronze Star and a piece of shrapnel in his left calf, and a friend named Hollis Granger, who he had carried half a mile off a ridge above the Mundungni Valley with a Chinese bullet in his shoulder. The two of them had come back to Colorado together. They had stayed. Earl had not gone to the war. Earl had stayed on the farm, and he had become a man who looked like his father. And when their sister Beatrice had grown old enough to know what was being done to her, she had run, and she had married a man in Denver named Henry, and she had borne him one child, a girl, and that girl was Marlene. Henry died of a stroke in 1976 when Marlene was 8. Beatrice followed him 2 years later. The cancer, the doctors said. Hollis Granger looked into his coffee cup when he said it, and Delaney understood that he meant other things too. After Beatrice died, Earl drove up from Pueblo and put Marlene in the back of his pickup truck and took her back to the farm. She was 10 years old. Silas drove down to Pueblo when he heard about it. He drove down with Hollis in the passenger seat and his army pistol in the glove box of his Ford. And he and Earl had a conversation on the front porch of the farmhouse that nobody else ever heard the whole of. And at the end of it, Silas walked out of the house with Marlene wrapped in a wool blanket and put her in the cab of the truck between him and Hollis. And they drove back up to Pine Hollow. And Marlene did not see Earl again for almost 20 years. Silas raised her like she was his own. He sent her to high school in Pine Hollow. He sent her to the University of Colorado at Boulder on what little money a Korean War carpenter could scrape together, and what Marlene could not get covered by a scholarship he made up in summers building decks on the rich side of Boulder. And she graduated and she married a quiet man named Whitfield. And that man left her before Delaney was 2. And Marlene came back to Colorado and raised Delaney mostly alone with Silas. A phone call away, Earl never forgave Silas for any of it. Hollis Granger paused there. He refilled his coffee cup. He refilled hers without asking. Earl died in 2005. He said, heart attack. He went down on the porch of that same farmhouse, and his hired man found him the next morning. I want you to know that. Earl Whitfield is dead. He cannot hurt you. He set the pot down on the stove. But he sat down again. He looked at her over the top of his glasses, which were thicker than her grandfather's had been. But Earl had a son, Bradford Whitfield, born 1957, 40 years younger than the war his uncle came home from. Raised on his father's bitterness like a child raised on a single bad story told over and over. Bradford had been a smart boy, Hollis said, smarter than his father, quieter. He had gone to law school at the University of Denver. He had passed the bar. He had built a real estate practice in Denver that did very well for itself, the kind of practice that handled the paperwork for men who did not want their names on the paperwork. He had grown up on the story that Silas Whitfield had stolen Marlene from her rightful family. He had grown up on the story that Silas Whitfield had stolen the Whitfield land too, because the original Whitfield land had belonged to their father, and Silas had walked away from his share of it in 1953. And Earl had spent 40 years rewriting that walkaway into a theft. Bradford had been waiting. Hollis said he had been waiting since 1999 when Marlene died. He had been waiting since 2008 when Silas died. He had been waiting because he believed with the certainty a man can only carry when the belief is the only thing left of his father, that whatever Silas Whitfield had built up in those mountains belonged to him. Why does he know there is money out there? Delaney asked. Hollis looked at her for a long moment. Because somebody in this town told him, he said. And I think I know who. She did not press him for the name, not yet. She watched him drink the rest of his coffee, and she thought about the boot print in the mud, and the footsteps in the gravel, and the note on her threshold, and she thought, all right. So that is how it is. She thanked Hollis Granger for the coffee. He told her she did not need to thank him. He told her very seriously, looking her in the eye over the rim of his cup, that if she needed anything any hour of the day, the door of the back room of Granger Hardware and Tool was unlocked from the inside, and the key under the false brick by the rain barrel was for the front. He told her this the way a man tells another man where the rifles are kept. She walked back out to the front of the store. She put her hand on the door. He spoke from behind her. There is one more thing, Miss Whitfield. She turned. My boy is going to come up to your place tomorrow morning. He is a carpenter. His name is Wyatt. He is 34 years old, and he does not say very much. And that is because he came back from the Persian Gulf, a different man than he went out as, and then he buried his wife 2 years ago, this April. He is a good man. I am telling you all of that now so you do not have to wonder about him later. He is coming to help you put up walls. That is all he is coming for. She nodded. Thank you, she said. He smiled just a little for the first time since she had walked into the shop. You have got your grandpa's hands, he said. I saw it when you set down the cup. She went out into the street. She walked back up to the property with 2 paper sacks of groceries from the little market next to the diner, and a coil of new rope and a box of 3-inch screws, all of it paid for from the sock in her jacket pocket. The day had warmed. The mist was off the grass. She unlocked the door of the Quonset hut and went inside and put the groceries on the workbench. And she stood in the great curved space of it, and she looked at the broken window, and she said out loud to no one and to her grandfather both, "All right, we start with the window." Wyatt Granger came up the next morning at 7. He came in a faded green Ford pickup that rattled. He stopped at the edge of the clearing and he sat for a minute in the cab before he got out the way. A man sits when he is preparing himself to be in a place. Then he stepped down. He was tall like his father had once been tall, and he was thin in the same way, and he wore a gray flannel shirt and work boots that had been resoled twice. He carried a leather tool roll under one arm and a thermos under the other. He walked across the clearing to where she was standing in the open doorway with the iron key in her hand, and he stopped 2 paces from her and he looked at her and he said, "I am Wyatt. My dad said I should not call you ma'am because you are about half my age. So I am going to call you Delaney unless you tell me otherwise." "Delaney is fine," she said. He nodded. He held out the thermos. "Coffee," he said. "Not as bad as my dad's." She took it. She poured a measure into the thermos cap. It was hot and clean. She handed it back. He looked past her into the building. "All right," he said. "Show me where we start." They started with the door. "It was the right place to start," he said, "because a door that hangs wrong is the kind of thing that wears on you every time you walk through it. And you cannot build anything good while something small is wearing on you." They took the door down off its hinges. They cleaned the hinge plates with steel wool. They reset the lower hinge with new screws. They rehung the door. It swung true. It closed flush. Wyatt set the level on the top of the door frame and watched the bubbles settle dead center and said, "There. Now we can work." Over the next week, they did work. They patched the broken windows with new glass, cut to size at his father's shop. They tarred the long crack in the roof and laid a piece of corrugated steel over it, bolted down with rubber gaskets. They built the first interior wall 2x4 framed and faced in pine. The first attempt of hers leaned a 1/4 inch off plumb, and she stood looking at it for a long minute, and Wyatt did not say anything. And she pulled the screws out one by one and started again. And the second one was true. He noticed on the 3rd day that she held a hammer the way her grandfather had held a hammer. He said so. He said it without making a big thing of it. He just said, "You grip like Silas." Then he handed her a chalk line and turned away. Pastor Elmer Crane came up the property on the 5th day. He was a small round man of about 70 in a clean white shirt and a black wool vest. And he carried a covered casserole dish and a Bible he did not open. He did not ask if she was a churchgoer. He sat on the front step of the building on the new boards Wyatt had laid across the threshold, and he ate a piece of his own casserole out of the dish with a plastic fork, and he told her stories about her grandfather. He told her that Silas Whitfield had sat in the 3rd pew from the back at the Pine Hollow Community Church every Sunday for 40 years. He told her that in the summer of 1987, Silas had re-roofed the houses of 3 widows in the town free of charge in August, in the heat alone because the widows had no men left to do it for them. He told her that Silas had refused in 2005 to attend the funeral of his own brother Earl, and that he, Pastor Crane, had refused to officiate it, and that the two of them had sat on this very stretch of land that night and drunk a quarter of a bottle of bourbon between them and not spoken a word. He left the casserole. He did not ask her to come to church. Doris Whitlock at the diner gave her a free bowl of potato soup the first time she walked in. She gave her a free piece of pie the second time. The third time, Doris sat down across from her at the booth, and she put a hand flat on the formica and she said, "Your mother used to sit in this exact booth on a Saturday morning when she was about your age. She would order black coffee and a short stack of pancakes and read whichever paperback novel she had brought. I think of her every time somebody orders pancakes. I have for 30 years. Delaney did not cry in the diner. She made it as far as the parking lot. On Monday morning of the third week, a county sheriff's truck came up the tire track road. She heard the engine first. She was standing on a stepladder, hanging the inside of a window frame with Wyatt holding the bottom of the ladder. And the sound of a vehicle on that road, which was not a road, made both of them stop and look at each other for a second before either of them moved. She came down off the ladder. She walked out into the clearing. The truck was a Ford F-250 black with the Pine Hollow County emblem on the door. The man who got out of it was about 55 years old, heavy through the middle with a thick mustache, the color of pipe ash, and small blue eyes that did not move quite the same speed as the rest of his face. He wore a tan uniform. The badge on his chest read, Mercer. The patch on his shoulder read, Sheriff. Morning, he said. He smiled when he said it. The smile did not get up as far as his eyes. Morning, she said. He looked at the building. He looked at it for a long time, with a slow, appreciative tilt of his head, the way a man looks at a horse he is thinking about buying. Calvin Mercer, he said. Sheriff out here for the last 12 years. Heard somebody new had moved out on the old Whitfield place. Wanted to come up and say hello. Make sure everything is all right. Everything is fine, sir, she said. He nodded. He did not leave. Lot of property out here, he said. Real isolated. You out here all by yourself, miss? She did not answer. He looked at Wyatt, who had come up behind her, and his eyes went a little flatter at the sight of him. Granger boy, he said. Sheriff, said Wyatt. The flatness in the sheriff's eyes did not change. He turned back to her. Reason I am asking, he said, is sometimes when an estate gets passed down out here, people come into possession of items that they would not necessarily think of as valuable, but that turn out to be valuable. Family heirlooms, cash, documents, things that ought to be properly inventoried for insurance, for tax purposes, for protection. The county can hold those things for you free of charge in the evidence vault down at the office. It is a service we offer, until you can get your bearings. That is very kind of you, she said. I do not have anything like that. She said it without blinking. The sheriff looked at her. The sheriff looked at her for a long second. Then he smiled again. Then he tipped his hat. Then he walked back to his truck and got in, and he turned around in the wet grass of the clearing, and he drove back down the tire track road. She watched the truck until it was gone. Then she watched the license plate of the truck in her mind, because she had a good memory for things like that, and the plate read 4WK219. And that was the plate of the same black truck that had idled at the head of her road the night she had arrived in Pine Hollow. She turned to Wyatt. "I need to call your father," she said. She used the landline at the hardware store. Hollis listened. Hollis did not say anything for a long time. Then he said, "All right. Stay there. I'm going to make a phone call." He came back to the phone 5 minutes later. "Frank McKenna," he said, "out of Canyon City. Retired Lieutenant, Colorado State Patrol. Hunted with your grandfather for 20 years. He says, and I am quoting him here, Mercer has always been a rat. He is coming." That night, Delaney could not sleep. But she could not sleep with a different feeling than before. She sat on the new boards of the doorway with her grandfather's journal in her lap, and Wyatt slept in his truck out in the clearing because his father had told him to. And the wind moved through the pines and brought the smell of snow down from the high ridges, and somewhere very far away, a coyote spoke once to the dark. She turned the pages of the journal slowly. She had read the front of it, the letter. She had not yet read the body. She read it now. The middle of the journal was not a journal exactly. It was a builder's notebook. Sketches of the Quonset hut dimensions written in her grandfather's careful block printing. Plans for an interior wall. Plans for a kitchen counter. Plans for a porch that had never been built. And then deeper in the entries began to turn. There were dates. There were names. There were short, bitter notes dated as far back as 1992, where Silas Whitfield had recorded every letter Earl had sent him. Every threat, every phone call, every time Earl had said the words, "my niece." She turned a page. She stopped. In the middle of a page dated June of 1998, 9 months before Marlene died, was a single line underlined twice. "Earl says he has found Marlene in Denver. He says he is going to take Dell back. I told him over my dead body. He said that could be arranged." She read the line 3 times. She turned the page. The next entry was dated March 5th, 1999, the morning after the accident. The handwriting was different. It was the handwriting of a man whose hand could not quite hold a pen. It was Earl. I know it was Earl. I cannot prove it. He will deny it. The State Patrol will close the file. They will call it a single vehicle. They will be wrong. I will get him for this somehow in this life or the next. But I cannot do it yet because Earl knows I have Dell. And if I move on him now, he will come for her. So I will wait. I will wait, and I will build, and I will prepare. And when the time is right, my granddaughter will be standing on ground he cannot reach with everything she needs, and he will be dead, and his son will come for her, and she will be ready. She closed the journal very slowly. She sat on the threshold a long time in the cold. She did not cry. She thought about her mother in the green corduroy jacket. She thought about the 20 minutes in her grandfather's kitchen on a rainy night in February of 1999. She thought about her mother coming back to the car with shaking hands and saying, "I love you, baby. Do you hear me?" She thought about what her mother had been doing in that kitchen. She had been begging her father to keep her child safe. Wyatt found her there at dawn, sitting on the new boards in the same position she had been in at midnight. The journal closed on her knee, the iron key in her right hand. He did not ask her what was wrong. He sat down beside her and he poured her a cup of coffee from his thermos, and he handed it to her without looking at her, and the two of them watched the sun come up over the ridge. When she could speak, she said one thing. "There is a basement." He looked at her. "What?" "There is a basement under this floor," she said. "He would not have left it just in this book. There has to be more. It took them most of the morning to find it. They tapped along the concrete floor with the back end of a screwdriver, 6 inches at a time, listening, just east of the wood stove near where she had laid out the first wall. The screwdriver rang back a different note, a duller note, a hollower one. They moved the workbench. They peeled back a square of asphalt tile that had been laid down over the concrete in a 6x6 pattern. Under the tile was a square of oak planking sealed at the seams with old black caulk. The caulk had been laid by a careful hand. It came up cleanly with a putty knife. Under the oak planking was a hinged trap door. Wyatt looked at her. "Delaney," he said. "Wait." She did not wait. She lifted the trapdoor. A flight of narrow stone steps fell away into the dark below the building. The air that came up out of them was cold and dry and smelled of paper and oiled steel. She felt along the wall just inside the opening, and her fingers found a switch and she flipped it. A single bulb came on at the bottom of the stairs. She went down. Wyatt came down behind her. At the bottom of the steps was a room. The room was perhaps 12 feet by 10. The walls were rough mountain rock hand-mortared. Along the right wall stood a workbench under a green-shaded lamp. Along the left wall stood 3 steel filing cabinets and 1 black Mosler safe waist-high with a brass dial. On the wall above the workbench was a map of Colorado. On the map were photographs, dozens of them, pinned with red thumbtacks. Black and white photographs of a man Delaney had never seen with her own eyes but recognized immediately because he had her mother's jawline and her own, and behind the jawline was something that had never softened. Earl Whitfield. There were photographs of the farm in Pueblo, photographs of a younger Earl on the porch of that farmhouse, photographs dated in pencil along the white border in her grandfather's hand of cards, a green Ford LTD, a brown Buick, and near the bottom of the map, pinned next to a tiny red mark on Interstate 25, just south of Castle Rock, 2 photographs taken at night in a parking lot dated March 4th, 1999 of a brown Buick with its front bumper crumpled and a small smear of pale paint along the right fender. Wyatt looked at the photographs. Then he looked at her. "Delaney," he said. "I know," she said. She walked to the workbench. She sat down in her grandfather's chair. She put her hands flat on the wood. Her grandfather had built this room before she was 10 years old. Her grandfather had spent 20 years sitting in this chair alone under this lamp, with these photographs on the wall above him. She closed her eyes. She did not cry. When she opened her eyes again, she reached into her jacket pocket and she took out the folded slip of paper with the Denver phone number on it, and she set it flat on the workbench in the pool of green lamplight. She stood up. There was a black rotary telephone on the corner of the bench, an old one, the kind with a cloth cord. She had not noticed it when she came in. She picked up the receiver. The line was live. He had paid the bill on this line for 10 years after he stopped using it. She dialed the number. It rang 4 times. A man's voice answered, old and unhurried. Bell. She did not know what to say. "This is Delaney," she said. "Whitfield. My grandfather was Silas." There was a long pause on the line. Then the old voice on the other end very softly. "I have been waiting 20 years for this telephone call, Miss Whitfield." She gripped the receiver. "He told me to call you in an emergency." "Yes," he said. "I think this is one." "Yes," said Howard Bell. "I expect it is. Listen to me carefully now. There is a safe in that room. The combination is your mother's date of birth, 2 digits at a time. 3 turns right, 2 left, 1 right. Inside that safe is a piece of paper. When you have read that piece of paper, you will know what your grandfather wanted you to do. You call me back after you have read it." He hung up. She turned to the safe. She knelt down in front of it on the cold stone floor. Wyatt did not speak. She put her fingers on the brass dial of the Mosler safe her grandfather had set into the wall of a room he had carved out of the mountain underneath the building he had built to leave to her. And she began slowly and carefully to turn it. The dial turned under her fingers with the soft mechanical click of a thing that had been waiting a long time to be turned. 3 right. Stop on 12. 2 left. Stop on 28. 1 right. Stop on 19. 12/28/19. December the 28th, 1968. Her mother's birthday. The day a midwife in a county hospital outside Pueblo had handed Beatrice Whitfield a baby girl in a white blanket, and Beatrice had named her Marlene because she had liked the sound of the name. The bolt slid back in the body of the safe, with a sound like a small bone settling into place. Delaney pulled the door open. Wyatt stood behind her, one hand resting on the back of her grandfather's chair, and he did not look into the safe. He kept his eyes on the stone wall of the basement room, the way a man keeps his eyes on the wall when another man is changing in the locker room, because he understood without being told that what was in that safe was not his to see first. Inside the safe were 3 things: a single manila folder, thick, a small wooden box about the size of a deck of cards, a pistol, a Colt 1911, the same model her grandfather had carried home from Korea in 1953, loaded, magazine in, safety on, sitting flat on the shelf with the muzzle pointed away from the door. She left the pistol where it was. She took out the folder. She closed the safe. She walked to the workbench under the green-shaded lamp, and she laid the folder down flat on the wood, and she sat in her grandfather's chair, and she opened it. The first page was a typed letter, carbon copy, slightly blue, dated July 11th, 2000, notarized at the bottom by a man named Wallace Tibbetts, whose seal was still bright on the page. The body of the letter was 4 short paragraphs written in formal language, signed in a hand that looked like the hand of a man who had been made to sign. She read it. She read it twice. She closed the folder. She sat for a moment with her hand flat on the cover. Then she said, without looking at Wyatt, in a voice that did not entirely belong to her, "He confessed." Wyatt did not move. Earl Whitfield wrote it down and signed it in front of a notary. He admitted that he ran my mother off the road on the night of March 4th, 1999 on Interstate 25, south of Castle Rock. He said he did it because Silas would not give Marlene back to him. He said he did not mean for her to die. He signed it anyway. My grandfather made him sign it. Wyatt was very still behind her. How, he said. Delaney looked down at the folder. I do not know how she said, but I am going to guess that the night Earl signed this, my grandfather and Earl were the only two men in a cabin somewhere up in the high country, and my grandfather had a pistol on the table between them, and Earl knew all the way down that if he did not sign that paper, he was not going to walk out of that cabin alive. She paused. He did not kill him. He just made him sign. Why, said Wyatt. Because of me, she said. He could not put Earl in prison. If he turned Earl in, Earl would have told the sheriff who his next of kin was. And the sheriff would have come to my grandfather's door. And Earl's lawyer would have come to my grandfather's door. And the state of Colorado would have looked at a 68-year-old widower carpenter and a 40-year-old lawyer's brother, and they would have made him give me up. He could not risk that. So he took the confession instead. He made Earl sign it, and he buried it down here under the building. And he waited. He waited for Earl to die. He knew Earl would die first. He was 11 years older. She closed the folder. He waited so I could live somewhere they could not reach. Wyatt did not say anything. She picked up the small wooden box. She opened it. Inside was a thin gold ring, Marlene's wedding band, inscribed inside in a script so small she had to tilt it toward the lamp to read. For my Marlene from her father, on the day she became a wife. May 14th, 1988. Delaney slid the ring onto the small finger of her right hand. It fit. She did not even feel the surprise of it. There were certain things in the world she was beginning to understand that her grandfather had built her down to the size of. She picked up the rotary phone. She dialed the number again. Bell answered on the first ring. I read it, she said. All right, he said. Now I will come to you. I'm going to drive up tonight. Tell your friend Hollis Granger to set a chair at his kitchen table for me. Tell him to set chairs for everyone he trusts. He paused. Miss Whitfield. Yes, I helped your grandfather build that case. I took some of the photographs you are looking at on the wall behind you. I am 80 years old, and I am one of 3 people still alive on this earth who knows what your grandfather did to keep you safe. I am tired of being one of 3. Tonight there are going to be more of us. Tonight we are going to begin doing what your grandfather was not allowed to do. He hung up. She set the receiver down on its cradle. She turned in the chair and she looked up at Wyatt. Wyatt looked back at her. All right, he said. That night in the kitchen of Hollis Granger's small clapboard house at the end of Spruce Street in Pine Hollow, 6 people sat around a heavy oak table that Silas Whitfield had built in 1971. Hollis Granger at the head in the chair he had sat in for 38 years. Wyatt Granger on his right. Delaney Whitfield on his left. The leather journal closed on the table in front of her, her right hand resting on the cover, with the gold ring catching the light from the overhead bulb. Across from her, Pastor Elmer Crane, his round, small hands folded in front of him, his Bible nowhere in sight tonight, because tonight was not for the Bible. Across from Wyatt Frank McKenna, 76 years old, retired lieutenant of the Colorado State Patrol, who had driven 3 hours up from Canyon City in a Chevy Silverado, the color of dried blood, with a Colt 1911 of his own in the glove box and a state patrol badge in his shirt pocket that he was no longer technically entitled to wear, but that he had brought anyway. At the foot of the table, with his hat on his knee and a cup of black coffee in front of him, Howard Bell, 80 years old, who had driven up from Denver in a Lincoln Continental that was 20 years old and immaculate, and who looked in the kitchen light like a man made entirely of old wire and patience. 6 of them, 1 bare bulb, a pot of coffee on the stove that nobody was drinking and nobody let go cold. Frank McKenna spoke first. "I have known Silas Whitfield since 1976, he said. "I hunted elk with him every November for 31 years. I'm going to tell you all something now. He never once mentioned Earl. Not once. Not on any of those mountains. Not in any of those cabins. I have known him for half my life, and I did not know he had a brother until tonight." He looked at Delaney. "Your grandfather," he said, "was the most private man I ever called my friend. And he carried this thing alone for 20 years because he had decided that you would not carry any of it until you were old enough to put it down again at the other end." Delaney did not speak. She nodded once. Frank turned to the rest of the table. "All right, here is where we are. We have got a confession signed by a dead man. We have got photographs of the dead man's vehicle at the scene of a homicide that was officially classified a single vehicle accident in 1999. We have got a private investigator who will testify that he took those photographs. We have got a sitting county sheriff who came up to that property under false pretenses 2 days ago and tried to talk this young lady into surrendering, quote, items of value, end quote, to county custody. We have got the same sheriff's vehicle parked at the head of her access road the night she arrived in town, and a written threat slid under her door at dawn the next morning that I am going to assume was put there by one of his deputies. And we have got a 40-year-old real estate lawyer down in Denver who is the son of the dead man and who is, by all accounts, on his way up here to take by force what he believes is his." He paused. "I am going to make a phone call tomorrow morning." "To whom?" said Hollis. Rebecca Hartwell said, "Frank." "Colonel, Colorado Bureau of Investigation. Pueblo Field Office. I trained her on the patrol in 1995. She owes me a favor from a methamphetamine investigation up in Trinidad. She does not owe me a small favor. She owes me a large one." He looked at Delaney. "CBI is the right agency for this," he said. "Not the FBI. The FBI will come in here in suits, and they will take your file to Denver, and you will not see daylight on this case for 2 years. CBI is state. CBI is local. CBI is people who grew up in towns like this one, and who know what it is for a county sheriff to be on the take. Hartwell is going to bring 2 investigators up here in unmarked vehicles. We are going to meet them at Pastor Crane's church because nobody who works for Calvin Mercer attends Pastor Crane's church. We are going to hand them everything we have, and we are going to let them do the work." He looked at Howard Bell. "Are you with us, Mr. Bell?" "I am 80 years old," said Howard Bell. "I am tired. I drove up here. I am with you." The pastor cleared his throat. "I will speak to anyone they wish to send to my church. I will speak to anyone they wish to send anywhere else. Silas Whitfield was my friend for 40 years. Earl Whitfield was a man I did not bury, and I will not bury his son's hold on this town either. He looked down the table. I want one thing on the record, he said. We do not handle this with weapons. We have not been asked to handle this with weapons. We are old men and a young woman, and we are going to handle this with law. He looked at Frank McKenna. Frank McKenna held the pastor's eyes for a long moment. Pastor, he said, I agree with you. I want the law to handle this. But I will tell you this also. If Bradford Whitfield drives up to that building with 3 men in his car, the law is going to be at least 45 minutes away from us on a good night. And we are going to be standing on Delaney's porch. And on Delaney's porch, we are going to do whatever we need to do to keep her on her feet until the law arrives. I will not bring a weapon. I am not willing to use. I have not done that in my life. And I am not going to start now. But I am also not going to ask this girl to stand on that porch alone. The pastor was quiet a long moment. Then he said, All right, Frank. Hollis Granger spoke for the first time. I have my Remington. I have had it since 1968. I have kept it clean. Wyatt Granger spoke. I have my hammer. Delaney looked around the table. 6 of them. 2 old soldiers, an old detective, an old pastor, a younger carpenter who did not say much, and herself. She put her hand flat on the journal in front of her. All right, she said. The week that followed was a long, quiet week. Frank made his phone call. Colonel Rebecca Hartwell drove up from Pueblo 2 days later in an unmarked gray Chevrolet Impala with another investigator named Loomis in the passenger seat. They met at Pastor Crane's church in the small office behind the sanctuary. They were there for 4 hours. They left with the original confession photographed and notarized again on the spot. They left with the private investigator's file. They left with sworn statements from Hollis Granger, from Pastor Crane, from Doris Whitlock at the diner, who had once watched Calvin Mercer eat Sunday breakfast with a man she remembered as Earl Whitfield in the summer of 1998, and from Delaney herself. Hartwell did not promise anything. What Hartwell said was, Miss Whitfield, this is what is going to happen. I'm going to open 2 investigations on Monday, one into the 1999 death of Marlene Whitfield, one into Sheriff Calvin Mercer of Pine Hollow County. Both investigations will be confidential. Sheriff Mercer is not going to know that he is under investigation. You are not going to discuss this with anyone outside this room. You are going to continue living your life on that property. If anything happens that frightens you, you are going to call this number, which is my mobile day or night, and someone from this office is going to be on your road within 90 minutes. Do you understand me? I understand, said Delaney. Hartwell looked at her a long moment. Your grandfather, she said, was a careful man. Yes, said Delaney, he was. Bradford Whitfield did not wait a week. He waited 5 days. On the night of the 5th day at 11 o'clock at night, 2 vehicles came up the tire track road to the property. A black Lincoln town car and a dark blue Suburban with no plates. 3 men got out of the Suburban. Bradford Whitfield got out of the Lincoln. He was wearing a charcoal overcoat over a charcoal suit, and he was not armed. He did not need to be. He had brought men who were, At the head of the tire track road, parked across the access from a stand of pines, was a Pine Hollow County Sheriff's truck, with its lights off, idling with Sheriff Calvin Mercer in the driver's seat, drinking convenience store coffee out of a paper cup. He was there to ensure that no 911 call from the property received a meaningful response from his department for the next 90 minutes. He was not there to participate in what was about to happen at the building. He had been told only that the lawyer from Denver had business at the Whitfield property tonight, and that the county would appreciate quiet. He was sitting in his truck at the head of the road when Frank McKenna's hand closed around his door handle from outside the driver's window. The door was unlocked. It came open in Frank McKenna's hand. Sheriff Mercer looked up. Calvin said Frank McKenna very softly, "Put the cup down." Beside Frank, standing in the dark of the tree line, were two men in dark jackets with no insignia and CBI credentials in their breast pockets. Beyond them, in the trees on both sides of the road, were two more. Sheriff Mercer put the cup down. At the building at the same moment, Bradford Whitfield was walking across the wet grass of the clearing toward the front door of the Quonset hut. His 3 men were walking 10 paces behind him in a loose triangle. They had not yet drawn what they were carrying. They did not feel they needed to. The front door of the building stood closed. The clearing was dark. Bradford Whitfield stopped 20 feet from the door. "Delaney," he called. He used her first name as a man uses the first name of a child. "The hour is late. We can do this politely or we can do it otherwise. Open the door." The door did not open. "Delaney," he called again. "Listen to me. The arrangement I offered you was a generous one. You were a juvenile in foster care 5 weeks ago. You are not equipped for this. Open the door and let us conclude our business, and you can keep this building and the land, and we will not see each other again. Or do not open the door, and the 4 of us will come in and we will conclude our business anyway, and you will not have the option of keeping anything. The choice is the same either way for me. The choice is different for you. Open the door." There was a long pause. Then the porch light of the Quonset hut came on. Delaney Whitfield was standing in the open doorway. She was 19 years old. She was wearing her grandfather's brown wool coat over a flannel shirt and work jeans, and her hair was pulled back at the nape of her neck, and on her right hand the small gold ring caught the porch light. She had no weapon in her hands. Behind her, from the dark inside the building, 4 men stepped out onto the porch and into the light beside her. Hollis Granger with the Remington, 870 held barrel down at his hip. Wyatt Granger with a framing hammer in his right hand. Pastor Elmer Crane with nothing in his hands at all, standing in the middle, his small round shoulders set inside his black wool vest. And at the edge of the porch, Frank McKenna, who had not been at the head of the road when Bradford Whitfield first arrived, but who was here now, his retired state patrol badge clipped onto the breast of his flannel shirt, where every man on the lawn could see it. From the tree line on the right of the building, 3 more men stepped out. They were older men in old field coats, and one of them had a cane. They were the post commander of American Legion Post 314 of Pine Hollow, and 2 of his oldest members. Hollis Granger had called them at 6 in the evening and asked them to be in the trees at 10. They had been in the trees at 9:45. Bradford Whitfield's 3 men stopped walking. One of them, the man on the left, took 2 slow steps backward. Bradford Whitfield did not move. Frank McKenna stepped forward to the edge of the porch. "Bradford," he said. His voice was not loud. It did not need to be loud. The clearing was quiet enough to carry it. You are standing on land that belongs to Delaney Whitfield. You have been ordered to leave. You will leave now. Bradford. Whitfield looked at him. There are headlights on you, Frank McKenna said. There are 3 of them. The first is the porch light. The second is the dome light of Miss Whitfield's pickup, which has been on and angled at you for the past 4 minutes. The third is the headlight of an unmarked Colorado Bureau of Investigation vehicle on the ridge above us, which has been recording video of this clearing since you got out of your car. There is a 4th vehicle at the head of your access road. In it, at this moment, Colonel Rebecca Hartwell is reading the rights of Sheriff Calvin Mercer, who is in handcuffs in the back of an unmarked car, and who is going to spend the rest of tonight in the Pueblo County Jail. He paused. Bradford, you have a choice. You can be arrested here on the porch of this young lady's home, with witnesses, with dignity, and with your hands at your sides. Or my colleagues from the Bureau can arrest you on the side of Interstate 25 at 3 o'clock in the morning, with your face on the hood of your Lincoln in front of a state trooper's camera. The result for you will be the same. The only thing that changes is how the rest of your life remembers tonight. He waited. Bradford Whitfield, who was a lawyer and who knew the way. Lawyers know when a thing was finished. Lifted his hands slowly to the level of his shoulders. His 3 men set down what they were carrying. The investigators came out of the trees. Bradford Whitfield was arrested in the wet grass of his uncle Silas Whitfield's clearing at 23 minutes past 11 on a Tuesday night in May. He did not resist. He did not look at the porch of the building. He looked at his own shoes the entire way to the car. Deputy Wade Tilson was arrested the next morning at 6:55 in the diner downtown, eating a plate of scrambled eggs. When Doris Whitlock walked from her counter to the front door and turned the open sign to closed and said, "The 2 gentlemen at the back booth would like a word with you, Wade." The investigations took 6 months. Bradford Whitfield pled to conspiracy to commit armed robbery and intimidation of a witness in federal court, 12 years federal time. Calvin Mercer pled to public corruption and obstruction of justice in state court, 8 years state time. Deputy Wade Tilson cooperated and was sentenced to 3. The 1999 death of Marlene Whitfield was reclassified by the Colorado Bureau of Investigation as a homicide. No charge was filed because no charge could be filed. The man who had done it had died in 2005 on the porch of an old Pueblo farmhouse, alone with no one to hold his hand. Delaney was given a certified copy of the reclassification by Colonel Hartwell at the Pueblo CBY office on a Wednesday in November. She sat in her truck in the parking lot afterward, and she read it twice, and she did not cry because the woman who had carried Delaney out of that car on Interstate 25 had loved her too much for crying to be the right thing. The autumn came. Wyatt finished the porch in September. He built it the way her grandfather had drawn it in the journal. In 1999, 4 feet deep, 18 feet long, with 2 cedar posts and a railing notched in the old way. He stained it the color of dark honey. He nailed up a small carved board over the front door that read in letters he had cut himself with a chisel, "Marlene's cabin. Coffee. Rooms. Rest." The first guests arrived the second weekend of October. 3 men from the Pine Hollow American Legion post the same 3 who had stepped out of the tree line on the night in May. They paid for the rooms in cash, and they sat by the wood stove for 2 nights, and they drank her coffee, and they did not say much, and they tipped her the morning they left in $20 bills that smelled faintly of mason jar. Frank McKenna brought a group of veterans up every other Saturday. Korean War men, Persian Gulf men, men from in between. They sat around the stove and traded stories that were old to them and new to her. Pastor Crane held an outdoor service in the clearing on the first Sunday of every month, weather permitting, with no offering plate. Doris Whitlock stopped by every Friday with a covered dish and a paperback novel for the small bookshelf Delaney had built next to the front window. Hollis Granger came up every Saturday morning in his 1989 F-150 with a thermos of coffee that was no better than it had been when she met him. Wyatt Granger was at the building most days. He worked on the back rooms. He fixed a leak in the kitchen. He took her over to his father's shop on the 3rd Saturday in October, and he showed her how to true a saw blade. He did not say much to her that fall, and she did not say much to him, and neither of them was in a hurry. He had buried a wife. She had buried a mother and a grandfather and her own first 19 years. Neither of them was a person who needed to be anywhere fast. On the morning of October the 28th, the first hard frost of the season lay across the clearing. Delaney walked out the front door of the cabin in a wool sweater and her grandfather's brown coat. She walked the length of the porch. She walked down the steps. She walked around to the back of the building where the old door over the basement stairs lay, flush in the floor of a new mudroom she and Wyatt had framed in August. She lifted the door. She went down. The basement was warm. She had run a length of insulated stovepipe down through the floor that summer and put a small cast-iron stove against the rock wall. And on cold mornings she lit it. The green-shaded lamp burned. Her grandfather's chair was where it had always been. The photographs were still on the wall. She had not taken them down. She did not think she would. She sat in the chair. She opened the leather journal. She turned past the letter to her. She turned past the sketches. She turned past the entries dated 1992 and 1998 and 1999. She turned past the long, quiet years from 2000 to 2008, in which her grandfather had filled the journal with little notes about weather and about the building and about her, the granddaughter he could not see. The granddaughter he was building a future for in the dark. She turned to the last entry he had written in November of 2008, a month before he died. Dell, I am tired. I think I have made it ready. The lawyer Pembroke has the key and the deed in the second envelope. Hollis has the rest. I have left you a place to stand. I have left you the means to build on it. I have left you the people who will stand beside you when the time comes. And I have left you the truth about your mother in the safe with the means to defend yourself if the truth alone is not enough. I'm sorry I will not be there to see what you build. I love you. I always did. Build slow. Build true. Stand on what you build. Grandpa. Below it, the rest of the page was blank. Delaney took the fountain pen out of the wooden box on the workbench. She uncapped it. She dipped it in the inkwell that her grandfather had left there 10 years before and that she had refilled in August. She wrote in a hand that was not yet as steady as his, but that was getting closer. Grandpa, if you are reading this, I am the one who is gone now, and someone else is 19 and they have walked through the door I unlocked and they are sitting where I sat. I want them to know what you told me. She paused. Outside, very faintly, she heard the small bell on the front door of the cabin ring. She heard Wyatt's voice from the porch saying good morning to someone. She heard far up the ridge an owl call once in the daylight, the way owls sometimes will when the season is changing. She bent over the journal and she wrote the rest of it. The land is not the gift. The money is not the gift. The cabin is not the gift. The gift is what you do with your two hands on the ground you have been given. The foundation is not the concrete. The foundation is the person who stands on it. Build slow. Build true. Stand on what you build. You are not alone. You were never going to be alone. He saw to that. She signed it. Delaney Whitfield, October 28th, 2009. She closed the journal. She put it on the shelf above the workbench between her grandfather's tool roll and the wooden box with her mother's ring where the next person to come down those stairs would find it. She turned off the green lamp. She climbed the stone stairs. She came up into her own kitchen in the early morning light, and Wyatt Granger was standing at the stove, pouring coffee into two thick, white mugs. And through the front window of the cabin, the frost was beginning to melt off the porch boards in the slow, honey-colored sunlight. And somewhere outside, Hollis Granger was unloading a thermos and a length of new chimney pipe out of the bed of his pickup. And Delaney Whitfield, 19 years old, and home took the mug Wyatt handed her. And she stood at the window of the building her grandfather had built her. And she drank.